Podcast. Of course, I'm my host, Shawn Soole. As you've had probably noticed, if you actually tune into Instagram and Facebook and my social medias, you would have noticed that I am going live a ton. I'm trying to keep it fresh and keep rotating through guests as much as possible, get different styles of guests. This week is sort of a local spotlight for my hometown, Victoria, BC. And if you're located in Victoria, BC, you're going to really want to listen to this one. Jess Taylor, he runs Wandering Mollusk and Shuck Taylor's on the corner of Blanchard and Johnson. I've actually revered him quite a bit over the years just for his the way he's done business and the grind he's put in, because we're going to talk a little bit about that, but it goes back so much further. And knowing that he would be balancing Wandering Mollusk pop-ups as well as working St. Frank's till 3 o'clock in the morning back in the day, really always showcased his entrepreneurial spirit and where his goals were going to be long-term. So welcome, Jesse.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Shawn. Looking forward to this.
Thank you so much for joining me. So give everybody the rundown, like, how did you get in the hospitality industry and where did the idea of Wandering Mollusk come from?
Yeah, 25 years now, so you're always wondering what you're going to highlight out of that. But you've been, in Victoria hospitality since 2001 in some form or the other. And I would say that the first half of me being in hospitality was always thinking about how I could get out of hospitality. How was I going to move on with my life? How was I going to do the thing that was going to make me happy or make me financially wealthy or whatever it was. And so a lot of my actions were certainly towards that and not necessarily embracing this thing that I was doing every day. And sometimes doing it really well and sometimes doing it very not well. And for me, the big catalyst was I had been applying for this job to go and do currency trading in Vancouver, and I just happened to know the owner of the business, and so I bugged him 5 years. Like every 3 months, I was phoning him up. I'm like, I want to come and do this, and it was always a constant, like, you're not ready yet, and I probably wasn't. But finally, I got that opportunity. So dropped everything I was doing. I think I was managing the bar out at Harold's at the time, out in Sydney, which is one of the jobs I actually really did enjoy. But the timing said I had to go. And yeah, I ended up just completely changing gears, working on a trading floor, making 150 phone calls a day to businesses, trying to become their currency broker. And you want to talk grind, like that was a grind. Hospitality was a breeze compared to that. But yeah, and I did it well successfully for 2 years, but it kind of ate at my soul, and I miss the interactions. I miss the people I would see every day. I miss the service. I miss the laughter. Not. I think this was me realizing that we have it pretty good, right? We're smiling and laughing and making jokes, and it's such a social and really kind of dawned on me that this was. This is what community is. This is what, a good life could be. So ended up leaving that job. My buddy was working at Rodney's in Yaletown, ended up starting there. And, I didn't know much about oysters. I think maybe I'd had oysters 2 or 3 times in my life up until that point. Certainly had no idea what was coming my way, and made a couple good friends there and just loved it. Like, Rodney's was a gonzo place. It was a place where only men were serving. They didn't allow women on the floor. They were just the hostesses. And I thought that was absolutely bizarre, the way that they structured that place. But they did it because they had been doing it one way for so long that was the way they were going to keep doing it. And, you wear these shirts that say, eat me raw and suck me off. And like, it's gonzo, like, because that happened 25 years ago when Stafford was there. And, but that being said, it's certainly mischievous, but it was a really fun spot. And there was just one house rule that we had to abide by. And that was like, take care of the oyster and the oyster will take care of you. And so I'm working in this place for it's always a party, but yet every single person is making sure that is the best quality shellfish that's ever going to go to a table. And anybody who cut corners on that was out. And so the end of that journey just came because I had a 4-year-old daughter at the time that was living back on the island, and it was okay for me to go to Vancouver to chase a dream where I could reach financial independence. But it wasn't okay for me to just be doing hospitality again. And so coming back here, I didn't realize how much I was going to miss the oyster game and the things that I learned. But once I got back here, uh, I knew that this was a part of me now. It was there. And, I got to give a big prop to, um, oh, I'm just sorry, I'm going to forget his last name right now, but you know Ryan very well, the cocktail guru here. I'll come back on his name later, but I talked to him one day over the bar at the Guild, and I said, I think I'm going to open up a catering company. He's like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to start catering oysters at weddings. He's like, okay. Comes back in the bar 4 weeks later, and he's like, I got your first gig. And so this thing that I was probably going to talk about for a year or two while I figured out how to get it done, he comes in and he just instantly bridges that for me. And one wedding turned to two, and then two turned to 5 or 6, and it just kept going and going and going. And yeah, now here we are.
What year was that when Wandering Mollusk started up?
August 2014.
Okay, so we're looking at like almost 11 years for, 11 years
Yeah.
yesterday, basically, for Wandering Mollusk.
Yeah.
So where was the journey during Wandering Mollusk? I know that, as I mentioned, you were working at St. Frank's and always had sort of a side gig as well. How did you balance out? Was it this awareness that while the Wandering Mollusk was going to be your long-term goal gig, to actually like still balance out and go, hey, I still need to make money because weddings are only X amount of dollars and doing gigs like in the beginning is only X amount of dollars. How was that awareness like balancing out having basically a full-time job as well as a full-time job?
Yeah, it was never going to be a full-time job because I just found I was never going to have the X amount of money I was going to need in order to open a restaurant. It was always going to take somebody's kindness and or opportunity. So I did kind of just when I started the mollusk, it wasn't me thinking about how I was going to grow the business. I went to BCIT when I was 20 years old, and I took the marketing business program because I always wanted to be a businessman. But I failed out of BCIT in 6 months because that place is so hard. I had no idea what I was walking into. And, so there always was this level of business in me. But even, with the mollusk and started these weddings, like if we started 2014, we never really caught traction until 2017. And a lot of that was, once again, luck. It was Douglas Magazine putting us as 10 to watch in 2016, so that opened us up to all of like the Gordon Head and the Oak Bay community. It took Mike Coghill coming here for Beer Fest one day, from Mike Coghill being the owner of Yellow Dog Brewing, seeing us and being like, man, you guys, like, this is cool. You should be like a food truck, but doing this inside the brewery. Because all the breweries were being built without kitchens, because you're an expert at one thing doesn't mean you're going to be an expert at the other. So that was the style. And we got invited to go to Brewers Row and do Yellow Dog, and started just doing. That was like, I remember the first pop-up we did at Yellow Dog, that was like the most money I ever made. People were coming far and wide. It was a lineup out the door. And I just so happened, a couple buddies of mine that were coming to see me from Rodney's, I was like, okay, well, you guys are shocking. Like, now I gotta triage this thing. Like, I'm gonna take the money, I'm gonna take the payments. You guys are all shucking. They all ended up working like a 6-hour shift. And then that led to Parkside Brewery and Moody Ales, and then pre-COVID, Whistle Boy reached out. And so a big catalyst for Shucks, it's like, yes, the weddings, it's good margin, it's good vibes, it's a really fun thing to do. But that was always such a seasonal business. And then getting into the brewery pop-ups allowed me to actually have a more consistent form of income. Because if I was popping up at, Yellow Dog every weekend, which I was doing, working St. Frank's Wednesday to Friday, getting up first thing in the morning on Saturday to take a ferry, crashing on somebody's couch on the Saturday night, shucking again on the Sunday, and then hopefully taking the last ferry home. Like, that was my grind.
Yeah.
Right. And that was hard. But only then did that start to materialize as, okay, like, Wandering Mollusk could be a business, because now I had a consistent cash flow. It was up and it was down, but at least it was consistent, because otherwise, it was just me working in the summer months, and trying to stack as many weddings as I could. And then I'd have to go back to whatever job full time that I was doing. And I was just really trying to break out of that. So there was just many years of me. I mean, and a lot of entrepreneurs will have this story, and you're working full time at a restaurant or something, and then you're working full time on the business on the side as much as you can.
So where did obviously we've mentioned Shucks through this? Where did Shucks sort of come into play, and when did you realize that that was one a realistic goal to evolve Wandering Mollusk into a brick and mortar, but also the realization that you could have the capital to start it? Because everybody knows starting a restaurant is not easy; it's expensive as hell.
Yeah.
There's always outside costs that you're just like, fuck, should have thought about that one. I've ran so many restaurants that I should have known about that specific thing. But where
Yeah.
was the evolution from Wandering Mollusk into Shuck Taylor's and that realization, okay, I can make this a brick and mortar, but also am I able to get the capital to make this work?
Yeah, I knew that I had to just kind of brute force my way into this. And it started early. Like I remember 2015 reaching out to the Jaws and be like, hey, you guys got leases coming up and, like buildings that are happening and, doing these like taking poor John from Etta around and like making him look at units with me. And even though I don't have a cent to my name, and he calls it like, yeah, it was the dog and pony show. Like I was always wasting their time. But I just figured that if I kept thinking about it and kept working towards it, then it was eventually going to happen. And how else was I going to learn? Like I had to go see what an empty unit was, and or a restaurant for sale and what you get out of it, and what's available and what are the caveats. Like I do things by physical action. That's how I learn. And so yeah, sure. I mean, John looked at 7, 8 restaurants for me, and I shudder thinking about it. Like the ones that we could have had. And I had one. I had a deal back in. So when did we open Shucks? This was 2022 in November. I had a deal for a place where the Haruna or the Hawaiian burger place is, because the veggie guys were moving out because their business was cratering. And and I knew in my head, I was like, this isn't the space. I don't have any refrigeration here. It's in kind of the bad part of town because Capital Iron's going to get knocked down and built up, and it didn't matter because I needed the place so bad just to justify what I'd been doing for so long, that I just didn't care. And then the best thing ever happened. BDC was 2 days late on my loan. I broke contract and they gave the place to somebody else. Right.
Oh.
And so it was that close to being that. And then the moment was, because I felt excuse me, I felt so that was a low point when that happened because I was so close. And I really wanted to push myself into a place like will it to happen, even though it wasn't the right spot. And then I went on the hospitality chat for Victoria. I was like, if anybody's looking to sell a restaurant, Wandering Mollusk is interested. And I get a call from Lauren. She's like, I think we could talk. And this is Shine Cafe. And we sit down in February and we work out a handshake agreement. And she said, like we just kind of talked about it. It's like, let's just make this deal, try and do it outside of the banks. We'll do it with each other. I'll help you, you help me, and it'll be a good outcome at the end. And she just really wanted to simplify her life. Like she had the very successful Shine Cafe up in Stadacona, and she just didn't want to be downtown anymore, like grinding that out. And for me, I wanted in, and it worked out beautifully. She's been a resource to me the whole entire way. She helped me out in anything that I would have asked for. And, we've become friends because of it. And so when I talk about kindness, it's going to take kindness for me to get a restaurant. Well, that's where it was. It was Lauren.
That's cool. Yeah, because you don't usually see that. Like, as you know, I've brokered deals and all that sort of stuff. Like, you don't usually see it. It's usually I want the money and I want to get out and fuck your situation or how
Yeah.
you feel about things. Go to hell.
But you either take it or you don't, because I got other people that are going to grab it, like step up. That was, yeah.
So Wandering Mollusk as a brand you built it very well. You're gaining potential. Doing the shift to a brick and mortar, how intentional was the Shuck Taylor's brand? Was that always in your brain about what what the concept would be, as we were talking about in the green room, the anti-restaurant.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, especially post currency trading, where it's super transactional, you want to get away from the transactional nature of hospitality, where it's just you come in, you spend money, I serve you, you get the fuck out. Um, you said in the green room you wanted to be an anti-restaurant. What was the concept around and the vibe around Shuck Taylor's from the get-go?
So the get-go was, my mood board was a playlist. I obviously had like notes jotted down, but I was just building out that, I think it's 800 songs now. People are asking us all the time, like, can I download this? Like, sure. Like, we're just playing like old hits. It just works so well in the restaurant. And so that was my first mood board, was just finding that, like, that vibe. And a lot of that came from Rodney's. My original plan was to have a middle, like a small Rodney's, because the one thing they did really well there was that every seat in the house could see the oyster shucker. That's the epitome of what an oyster bar is. Like, you want to see the show, you want to see the stage, you want to see a bunch of grown adults like laughing and enjoying the fact that they're shucking oysters for other adults. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, and that's what makes it so fun, right? Like, what are we taking seriously here? You crank up the tunes, you over pour the wine, you just create an ambience, you create an atmosphere. And what doesn't go into that is today's like on-demand culture. And so I mean, everybody, all the brunch places in Victoria, they're all allowed to be line-up only. None of them take reservations. But God forbid you're serving dinner and you don't take reservations, people lose their shit.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like, whatever happened to earning something? I don't want somebody up in Gordon Head being able to get on their phone and book like my prime 5 o'clock seating on a Friday night 4 weeks into the future. And then they maybe show up, or they're waiting for 3 more guests. I want the feeling of somebody to maybe wonder that they may not get a table, or a table that they like, to walk down to Shucks, and we greet them at the door and we're like, hey, how you doing? We're pretty full right now, but I got this little cozy space in the corner. I'm going to get you in. Give me like 5 minutes. Like, that is an experience. And we're losing all that stuff. And so when I talk about the any restaurant, I talk about skip the dishes, right? Like, what a nightmare that just gets rolled into a restaurant during peak busy times, kills the kitchen, right? You have this little machine that's constantly beeping. So whatever the hostess is, if you have a hostess, we don't, but or host, sorry, but if it's just like beep, 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 it's constantly printing. So, I'm just trying to get away from like the instant demand culture. I'm trying to create a place that shucks for staff and guests, that keeps them away from that. I want it to be an escape. And so a lot of my anti-restaurant is because of that,
That's cool. So when it comes to sourcing oysters and doing training and stuff, because like you get oysters from all over the world, which I think is something that we've never really experienced here in Victoria, because usually Victorian oyster houses or oyster bars have always been like, okay, we just do West Coast oysters, and you might get something from PEI, but you're bringing in oysters in from like Britain,
France.
yeah, and
Yeah.
France and stuff like that. I say Britain, and it sounds I'm still saying Britain, but I mean Britain. Um, how are you sourcing that sort of stuff? And then, as you said, you like, I'm trying to wrap my head around like it's an anti-restaurant, super chill, super laid back, great, but then folding in this sort of level of professionalism when it comes to like, as you said, with Rodney's is a perfect example. Like every oyster, every shellfish was perfectly shucked when it went out. How do you balance that out with like training your team on these are the oysters we have today? This is what we're doing. This is how I sourced them. How do you balance that out?
So you have to know what to lose in order to get what you want, right? This as far as cocktails, the complexity of the cocktail lists now is almost become ego for a lot of restaurants.
Again,
Um, you're trying to hit, yeah, again. So you're trying to hit service standards as a server in restaurant B, but then you're all of a sudden putting down this big brick book of all the cocktails, and it's like, well, you got a minute to like get a drink, because we want drinks on the table in 2 minutes. It's like, well, why did you give me this novel to read, right? Like, I don't know how to make sense of all this. So the complexity is in the oysters, right? That is our professionalism. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to get drinks on the table in 30 seconds, right? So we can't do that if we have bartenders and cocktailing. So let's just put everything on tap. So our margarita's on tap, our Pim's cup is on tap. So anybody there could, like, all of us are our own bartender. So you get that order, that drink goes on the table in a second. And because the complexity is in the oyster, and the things that I want to talk most about are the oysters, because that's why you're there. So I don't want to derail the conversation or the service by getting too deep into other things.
Mhm.
That's why we have this small menu, right? It's just like we're just playing they're the hits.
Mhm.
These are the things that have worked on the East Coast for, the last 100 years. Like we now, like, we're getting soft shell clams flown in now, so we could do deep fried clams and frites. Because if you go down the coast of Maine, what do you see? Clam shacks. Well,
Mhm.
does anybody actually know what that term was? It means they're deep frying clams and making clam sandwiches. And they're popular and they're cool. So let's do it here. Fuck calamari, right? But within that, we, like, there's so much more that I wanted to do. Like, when I opened, I had a huge, like, red wine order because I wanted to do a ribeye with, like, an anchovy butter.
Mm.
But I had to accept the fact that it was going to derail the kitchen and
Mhm.
we weren't going to get the consistency that we needed from it. And you have to make these sacrifices. And so if my priority is shellfish, then that's where the complexity is. And so we could bring in whatever we want because all the staff understand what their role is. And we talk about oysters every day. Everybody that's in Shucks could shuck oysters. I'm not saying everybody's doing it well enough for a $4 service,
Mhm.
right? But they're all interested. They all understand it. And it's like, when I walked into Rodney's, right? Nobody talked to you for 2 weeks. There was no training program. You just had to exist and figure it out. And if you were there in 2 weeks, you got to stay, right? That's a hard ass restaurant to walk into, you know? So on the second day, buddy, or good friend of mine now comes to me and he's like, no one gives a fuck where you came from or who you are or what your stories you got. He's like, if the guys start joking with you in a couple weeks, he's like, cool, you're in, you know? And it's like, well, that's not how I'd run my place, right? Like, everybody there is included. Everybody there could shuck oysters. Everybody, you know, but they're like going through the same thing that I went, where they're just slowly falling in love with this thing and they're not always realizing it.
Mm.
Because once you started serving oysters and you're a hospitality kid, there's nothing else like it. You don't get dictated to. People aren't saying, I want my triple vodka soda with 3 limes, please. You don't get that here because the customers don't know as much as you, and we're there to teach. And half of this job is teaching people, but in the most fun, like, hospitality, feel good way, right? It's good vibes. And you get to do so much more when you create that space. Now, yeah, I had a playlist that was a mood board, but there was no guarantee that that playlist was going to create what it's created now. I mean, there's so much that is just, and we could talk about that, but as much as I had things written down and I knew there was things that I wanted to do, a vibe is, yeah, I think it's created, but it has to be accepted. I could create a vibe and nobody wants it, and then I'll quickly go under, right?
Yeah. When did you learn how to build this sort of culture, or did it just happen sort of organically about what you wanted and you sort of just work backwards from, there's my goal and then this is where I'm working backwards and this is how I'll create a team to make sure that I get to that goal?
Yeah, I don't know if it was that polished. I think I just showed up every day. When I talk about the anti restaurant, I would also talk about, it's everything of, like, I've been lucky enough, and I'll say this now, to work at some horrific restaurants in my hospitality career, where everything that's bad has been done. I could think of Wet on Granville Island was one of the worst restaurants I've ever worked at. I can only talk about that now because they're no longer here. But that trauma bonding of, when you work with all, you're all working in the same horrible place, so the staff becomes super tight. I
Yeah.
mean, so many friends came from that place, right? Jeff Wright just opened up Fizz, and he was the general manager of that at Wet. And to this day, I could just look at him and just, like, say something, and we both just start howling about how funny it is. But the reason why I was lucky to work at places like that and other places is because you learn how not to do things by watching people fail.
Mm.
You know, watching other people make mistakes and watching their failures and watching what happens when the music list is not a vibe or the lights are too bright, you know, or nobody's taking care of the door or there's no systems, there's no, like, all of these things is, you know, that's how I learned. So when I did Shucks, it was like, okay, well, we just won't do that. You know, we keep the mood lighting, like we keep nice moods with the light. We make sure the music's, you know, if it's happy hour, the music goes up. But as soon as happy hour is done and we got that half an hour lull, you turn it the fuck down, right? Because there's nothing that kills a room faster than walking into an empty room with music that's too
Yeah.
loud. And most people wouldn't understand how important those things are. But that is your constant day to day. You're shifting, you're touching, you're moving, it never stops. It's never going to stop, right? You're making sure that everybody's on the same you know, program as you. So there was a lot of that. It was just trying not to do what I had seen done wrong. But of course, the space gave me tons of things that I never would have expected, like the high ceilings.
Mm.
It makes such a difference in that room. You know, the bones of a 115-year-old building.
That's
You
probably
know that.
pros and cons to that one.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, we've learned the hard way.
So talking about culture stuff, if you ever looked at if anyone's listening, they've ever looked at your social media, what is the story behind the push-up penalty that you?
Yeah.
I relatively know the story, but I think it's hilarious, and I'd love you to explain it.
So for those that don't know, it shocks when somebody's late, and it happens a lot. And funny enough, it happens between three individuals that live within literally 100 feet of the restaurant. They think they have it so dialed, but they never do. You know, the hospitality's moved on from, you know, the old chef's culture that we know, you know, the bartender culture where everybody just gets to yell at everybody and tell them to go fuck themselves and be better. And, you know, the Gordon Ramsay, like, you know, pieces of bread on each side of his face. And it's like, who's the sandwich now? Like, it you're kind of lucky that you get good people to work for you. And I think this is where culture and the community within the staff is more important than the culture and the community of your patrons. Because having that staff that believes in that is the one that's going to keep the community coming in and in and in. And so I say there's hills to die on. So if you're late, cool, you're going to do 10 push-ups, 15 push-ups, 20 push-ups, sometimes burpees, and I'm going to film it and I'm going to put it on social media, and it's there at Shuck Taylor's, and you could go look at it. And you know, I just want them to feel a little bit of like, oh, I'm being kind of shamed within my peer group,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then Jess is going to post it, and god damn it, I'm going to be on Instagram, so you know, not everybody loves to be public facing. um there's just times when you actually need to be the authority, and there's times when you could take that opportunity and just create culture. And you know, nobody's going to die if somebody's 15 minutes late. And you know, and we're talking about that. We're not talking about people that are hours late or
Mm-hmm.
doing it habitually. Like, it's always, you know, there's always a little 5, 10, 15 minute window. And I get a kick out of it. I laugh. My friends talk about it. My mom said, like, she gets a laugh out of it. So it's just one of those things that I decided one day, and it just happens to work.
That's awesome. So how are you balancing now with Chuck Taylor's? We're walking into 2 years being open now. How are you balancing a brick and mortar place, which already for most solo operators is already a challenge, and then also
Mhm.
balancing out continuing the Wandering Mollusk brand?
So the first year, I really, like last year, I really didn't do as much for the mollusk. If there was a wedding coming in, I took it. I was doing a little bit of like almost like F off pricing, like
Mm.
things that I would normally do before because I had all the time. I couldn't do as much, and I started feeling a little guilty about that. But then I just didn't have the time. I was going to burn myself out. So we weren't doing pop-ups at Whistle Boy. And then this year I decided that I would, you know, start spending a little more time on it and just start pushing forward. I mean, a lot of our Vancouver stuff now, I just give to the Oyster Boys, and because I don't want to go to Vancouver as much. It takes a toll on me, and I need to be here. And not even so much for the restaurant because the team's running it, but just so I could carve out my life again. All these things I used to do before, you know, I was doing 60, 70 hours a week in the restaurant, trying to get that balance back because that's what's going to make me a better operator. But yeah, so with the mollusk, it's doing its thing. We've done a little bit more charity with it this year, which has actually been fun because that was a component I could never do before because I really needed that to eat. I couldn't afford to give things away. And so being able to do a little bit more with the mollusk has been a really fun, project for me. And so, and funny enough, those things bring opportunities, right? So it does come full circle. Yeah, I think I'm going to gear up the mollusk for next year, hire somebody to run it. And, we've started doing offsite catering with the seafood buckets and lobster rolls. And so I see the potential of what we're doing right now. Um, and that will, if we could just stay in our lane, we could just keep being the West Coast seafood guys. And it's not just, you don't have to go to Shuck Taylor's anymore or order an oyster bar. It's like, we could bring the lobster rolls to you. I mean, we're doing a wedding up in Cowichan in a couple of weeks that, it's going to be 20 buckets dropped on a whole bunch of butcher paper, and everybody's just going to, eat with their hands and hopefully not ruin those wedding dresses. And right. And it's fun because the whole reason why Shucks happened is because of the buckets, which happened during COVID. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those seafood boils.
Oh wow.
And that idea I had for 4 years. I think I saw that idea. We opened 2014 at Wandering Mollusk. I think I saw that idea like end of 2015. Some guy in like Long Island was doing these single-use cooking can seafood boils, but he had his own boat and he was like sourcing the fish and all that. But COVID hit, like I had no idea how to do that. And then COVID hits and it's like, like this is the time. Like this now or never.
Yeah.
Right. Because I had a captive audience. As soon as those like Instagram started going out, people were like, what? And it's a huge part of our business. Like we're still selling boils like all week. It's good for us. So we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. So it's a natural evolution that we're going to continue with boils and find new markets for it. Right.
You were talking about education earlier, and it popped in my head about on the West Coast we always have red tide times, and the government had all the notices about fucking red tide and oysters, and you shouldn't eat oysters and so on and so forth. But you made a big push during that time to say, hey, just so you know, the red tide is in this little tiny area, and you can eat oysters everywhere else, including PEI on the East Coast or anything deep south. How did you sort of tackle that? Because I know a lot of oyster bars or restaurants that serve oysters just go no oysters because of perception.
They just take them offline. Yeah.
Even if they're not getting sourced from a red tide area, they just stop getting sold. But how did you sort of tackle that when it came about?
Well, and isn't that for them to do that, and one, that's a lack of education, but it's also a lack of like understanding what it is that you're selling. Right. And I think that is just like erroneous. Like if you're going to serve oysters, it's your duty to know everything about them. Like, don't just hand them out because you think that it's going to give you a happy hour and it's going to get more people in to drink wine and get some gnocchi. Right. Like it fucking matters. Like shellfish matters, and people need to talk about it in the right way. And I'm always trying to figure out the different ways of me framing these complex issues sometimes, right? And it was certainly with the red tide and the Vibrio and the Noro, that stuff happens. Like you're eating raw shellfish. It happens in mussels, it happens in clams. It's an ocean environment. And this is why you got to know your stuff. You got to know that oysters need to stay underneath 4 degrees, like whether they're in the bed or the fridge or whether they're in shipping. Like you got to know who your oyster farmers are. Like you should have relationships with them, right? Not everything needs to be ordered through Cisco or GFS. When it comes to shellfish, I think that you should have a relationship with a farmer so that you could talk about that community. And, for me, a lot of this is you'll just see in the news and it will be like people getting sick off BC oysters. I understand they can't get specific. I understand you can't go and say, well, this is coming out of X farm, because you could do some serious damage to that brand. I think you could at least make it regional though. Like if it's coming out of Bain Sound, it's coming out of Bain Sound, right? Which is generally where most of it happens from a year-to-year basis, like with the herring fishery and all this. And I know they hate me talking about it, but there's truth. It's a shallow sound, and there's a lot of other industry in that sound. And, oysters are just sitting there being little filters, and shit's going to happen.
Mhm.
Right. So I know I was going to answer a question that we never got to because I just love long, big-winded answers. But, the whole thing with being able to get these oysters in my seafood logistical chain is because I do spend time figuring out who these farmers are, and I reach out to them and I talk to them. It's almost like I'm doing a podcast, but I'm doing it with my oyster farmers, and it's just us on the phone.
Mhm.
It's just me getting to know them and seeing oh man, I see that you guys have this product. Do you ship out west? Is there a way to do this? You know, and that's part of the fun for me. I want variety. It's like having you got one oyster in your restaurant. It's like having one cocktail.
Mhm.
There's no fun in that.
Yeah,
You
it's
know.
funny when I go to the East Coast and hang out with some boys in the East Coast, they have a very disdain for West Coast oysters. It's
Yeah. Oh yeah. They love their East Coast
Yeah,
for
it's
sure.
Toronto, Montreal, and I remember one story. I showed up at a wine bar. We were at Toronto Cocktail Conference, and I ordered 3 dozen oysters because there's 6 of us. So I was like, okay, well, that's half a dozen oysters each, and I ordered some coochies from BC,
Yeah.
and they all arrived, and then they all showed up and oh, these BC oysters. I'm like, fuck yeah, they're fucking coochies, they're legit, and they're like, yeah, no, we're not going to eat those. And I ended up eating like 2 dozen oysters to myself, which
Yeah.
I suggest when you're going out for a bit of a binge during a cocktail festival not to do.
Yeah, people get sick off oysters, and I'll say this, sometimes it's not the oyster, sometimes it's how much were you drinking and how many oysters did you eat? The oyster didn't do it to you, you did it to yourself,
It's not like steak
right?
treats that line your stomach for alcohol. It's oysters. Um, I think last time we caught up face to face, I was catching a flight to Vancouver. You were going to Seattle because I know, obviously, if anyone's been listening to this podcast at all, you do a ton of research on what's going on in the seafood scene, and it's something. Growing up in the country, seafood was never really a attainable thing for me. I love my oysters, but fish and that sort of thing. Growing up in the country as a kid, it was all something that was too expensive for my big family, and just you're still an hour and a half away from the sea, so it's just not
Yeah.
something next. Um, and you were doing research in Seattle, and I think you were going to San Francisco as well at that time. You were doing a little bit of a West Coast trip. What's the next step for Shuck Taylor's and Wandering Mollusk as brands for you over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so there's, me researching is really important because the reason why Shucks works in Victoria is that the oyster bars that are here left a lot of room for me to enter.
Mhm.
I mean, they could have shut me out at any point if they had, honed their skills, got a little more knowledge, spent a little more time on it, showed some passion. But part of that is you need to constantly be re-inspired. So every year I'm lucky enough to go to the Boston Seafood Show. It's one of the top three biggest seafood shows in the world. There's not a lot of oysters there, but you certainly see what's coming down the pipe in the seafood industry in the next year or two. And then you actually get to hang out in Boston, which means a lot of seafood. Yeah. So that's awesome. In terms of what I'm seeing right now is I'm seeing that seafood is a generational opportunity.
Mhm.
And I think it's been ignored for anybody who was kind of born in the 80s. My parents didn't eat much seafood. They knew how to cook it, but they were too easy. They were just being boomers,
Mhm.
right? We didn't have a lot of seafood in the house. And I lived in Comox Valley where there was ton. That's where the oysters are. Um, and I know that everybody, there's so much more interest in seafood now because when we keep talking about health and we keep talking about clean eating, high protein, all these different things that seafood, sustainability, all these things that seafood provides. The gap right now is that no one really understands how to cook it or source it. So it's like if you have a date or you're cooking for your wife, it's like, well, I really would love to get that sea bass, but I don't really know how to cook it properly. I don't know what to put on as a side, but I could sure make a mean chicken,
Mhm.
right? You're always going to kind of default to what you know, because sometimes just learning new stuff is scary. You might have to fail a couple times. You might burn the fish. So I do think right now seafood is a generational opportunity. And so everything I'm doing is to kind of capture that. I'm working on my retail brands. So the seafood buckets are part of that. I'm going to back up a little bit here for those that don't know. I'm a big believer in the vertical stack in a restaurant. So I have my hot sauce company, which is, you know, that other sauce. This started off as just like a hot sauce I was making for Wandering Mollusk, and then it just morphed into what it is now. We go through tons of this stuff at Shucks. Like we sell the buckets within Shucks, we sell the catering within Shucks. You know, this is the tactic, is to try and get more revenue within your restaurant. And if you could do that by building other brands, well, that increases the reach of your restaurant. Because, you know, I got people that phone me or like email me from South Carolina. They're like, you know, the TSA like dumped out my hot sauce. Could you send me one down here? Like that stuff was delicious. Like, yeah, I'll send you hot sauce down to South Carolina. What a reach, you know? And this is what the internet does for you, right? So yeah, in terms of other things, I'm in talks right now about actually expanding Shucks. And we've been doing it for about 6 months. It's been on and off. There's, as you can imagine, there's lots of different things to consider, such as like, okay, I'm clawing back my time. This tells me that I will have no time, right? And that's just how that will go. But yeah, did that kind of answer the question a bit?
Yeah, it's just in the next 6 months and in the next year, are you finding it as an entrepreneur? Are you finding it difficult because you sort of hit that plateau now where you're like you clawed back your time, now you have a little bit of work life balance and you're sort of happy, and now you're like, okay, if I take this next step, all that time is going to be pulled down for at least another 2 to 5 years, and
Yeah.
that's so how do you balance that out, and how do you want to take that next step? Because as we very started this podcast was about like financial freedom and how to like build that wealth that you can be comfortable and have that work life balance. But in hospitality, it always, as I said to my wife who's not in hospitality, it's like I need to work 3 times as hard to make as much money as you do working 30 like.
Yeah, there's truth to that, right? Yeah.
So with the next 6 to 12 months, as you were saying, expansion, are you looking at expanding in Canada or expanding in BC or down the West Coast? What's the plan? If you could,
Yeah, we looked at that. When I first kind of came upon this idea, I wanted to go into Washington State. Like that was me thinking Washington, Oregon, California. Just because I wanted it to be interesting. I wanted to do something interesting. I've never been east of the Rockies in Canada, and I want to. Like Maritimes are high on my list, but I don't know what it is in Ontario. I don't, you know. So that was my original thought. And then when I got into this conversation with this group, you know, they have a bit of a roadmap in terms of how they've done this before, where they've taken restaurant concepts and they have taken it to scale and then sold them. And I don't know if that's necessarily where I want to go. I think there's a lot of soul searching to do. It's certainly an exciting idea, but I always wonder, it's like, how do you recreate this thing that was so organically created? You know, are you hoping to hit 8 out of 10 features in a new restaurant? But maybe, but we've all seen brands get really big and then we just see them start to, you know, we have a Chipotle's here. That doesn't look like the ones in the States.
no.
You know, it's just like it's a half-ass version of it. And that eventually just happens. So is it better for me to own this and just, you know, start working on more of a retail aspect of the business, which is just as exciting and it means I get to sleep in my own bed? I mean, I don't know. I'm really at the crossroads here. We're just trying to get through summer and then really, you know, shine some light on it and see where we're at.
I've had a couple of people on the podcast that have had like multi units. Like I had Jack McGarry from Dead Rabbit, and they just opened Dead Rabbit in Austin. They're doing one in DC. They're looking at opening 50 Dead Rabbits in America in the next 5 years. And
Crazy.
I mentioned to him, I was like, because we always, I think as hospitality people, one, we're people pleasers. We want to make sure everybody's happy all the time, and to a degree, we know that us or our people are going to bring that joy to someone.
Yeah.
But also usually mostly passion driven, and the money is like a secondary thing. It's like, okay, I know I'm going to make money from this if I'm passionate about it. So then when you talk about exit strategy to people, they're like, I'm not sure about my exit strategy because I feel like I could do this for like another decade and a half and be happy. So no, it's always a tough conversation that I've had with a couple of multi-unit people, and they're like, I have just systemized everything. Everything's exactly where I want it to be, and I can walk away from it in 3 years.
Well, systems will set you free, right? That's the truth. I mean, that was what was told to me the minute I walked in the shocks. It's like you want to not be here all the time, you need systems. And it's the same if you're scaling. Um, yeah, I don't know. I could be happy with what I have. I don't need it all, but we're also, we want to be busy. We want projects. We want things to do. And so if I'm not doing that, then what is it that I'm doing? And then all of a sudden, that's another really big question that you have to ponder and figure out, right? So,
I've got a friend, he's 73, he owns a restaurant, he's been in the business for 50 years or 55 years. And I'm like, what do you want to do when you retire? He's like, I'm not sure what I want to do. I'm like, I have been doing this for so long, I'm not sure if I have it in me to do 9, 10, 11 hours of just relaxing time a day.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, the best version of me is when I'm shucking oysters. It's happy hour, the room's filling up. I get to ask, like, where are you guys from? How you doing? Hey, you look like that guy from the movie. Like, are you, like, you get to have fun with people, and that's always going to be like the happiest I'm ever going to be, because we have created something that's so fun, and it just lets people smile and relax and be curious. And having a couple kids sit at the bar, like, I love giving them the oyster knife. I love seeing that reaction on their parents' face when they're like, and then they're like, no, okay, it's okay, it's okay, like, we're in a good safe space here, like, you know because you could get kids knives. You could just do that, right? And you could teach them how to use it, and you could teach them how to open an oyster, and they will always remember that. That's a core memory for them, right? Like my daughter, she's 17 now. She just started working in the restaurant, which is one of the best, like, versions of this. But I taught her how to shuck oysters at 11 years old, and she could shuck perfect oysters. And every time she does it, she's like, I think it's really funny that I hate oysters, right? Like, she just doesn't eat them, but doesn't mean she doesn't know how to shuck them. So it's pretty cool.
that's awesome. So we're at the point of the podcast where I ask 5 deep podcast questions. These usually throw every guest off a little bit. So
All right.
what is one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
I would say the gift card pull, right? So you were there for that when we ran out of money in May. We were opening in September, and I'd been thinking about, like, GoFundMe's. I'd been thinking about, I think GoFundMe is actually for, when people need money because they're sick. And so I realized that because we had the Wandering Mollusk e-commerce site, I put gift cards on there. I said, if you buy a gift card, you'll get 10% off of it, and your money will help go to making sure Shucks gets open. And I thought we would make like maybe $1,000 off of it. And it was $26,000 within 7 days.
Wow. That's
And so that was community,
yeah, that's
right?
cool.
So you can, now you talk about building an audience. What I didn't realize was that Wandering Mollusk was just accidentally building an audience as it went, because we were just running around all these different cities doing this thing. There's people that still haven't picked up their gift cards. I've emailed them. I'm like, hey, your gift cards here from 2 years ago when you helped support this dream of a business. I would love it if you came and used it. That would be awesome, right? And so, yeah, community.
That's awesome.
That changed me. Like that, I had never experienced anything like that in my life, and it just made me really a lot more grateful, and also why, like, now I'm more inclined to do the charity stuff with Wandering Mollusk, and pass the oyster bar forward a little more.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
Oh man, these questions do throw people, hey. Just be nice, right? It's something that I battled with when I was just like a bitter bartender, back in the day, when I wanted to do everything but be behind the bar, and it was just a means to an end. And now, I'm obviously in a place where I just feel more comfortable with myself and who I am and where I'm at. And I'm just, yeah, be nice. Like, this whole Shucks thing is about being nice, and the amount of, what, just the way people are in that room, like what we created because of that, that sticks with me.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you understood earlier in life?
That you could just do things for sure. Yeah. I mean, it all worked out the way it was supposed to be. I wasn't ready to do this earlier than that, but yeah, you could just do things. I think I was so scared of, okay, so look at the public speaking stuff. So I've never had to do, these podcasts or go on TV or like, the making videos for Shucks now. Like you call it Cringe Mountain, you call it wherever you want. I mean, I've taken the Cut 30 course 4 times. I think it's like an $800 US course to try and get better at doing social media. And every time I do 2 videos and then I'm gone because I got distracted by work, right? Like, and so I can't wait to take my 5th one, and hopefully that's the one that's going to get me through, you know. But yeah, it's I never thought I'd be doing this.
How do you define success, and has your definition of it changed over time?
Yeah, absolutely. Expectations within the restaurant have changed. That's a big lesson, I think, from when I started and I hired friends. And then I didn't realize the restaurant would get so busy and demand so much, and they were willing to like not give as much. And so expectations change, um, for sure. And sorry, what was the question again?
How do you define success, and has your definition of it changed over time?
Yeah, success is just being happy with where you're at in yourself. And it's a place I'm at now where I that makes me feel successful. Like I literally will be like, I'm gonna pinch myself to make sure this is real, right? Because we're having so much fun.
What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
Oh, it's seafood guy. There's no way that I don't make a huge imprint on people. Like by the time I'm done this, yeah, I just want people to eat more seafood. I want people to respect it. I want people to understand. Like in the East Coast, they have this culture and this maritime hospitality, and they're so connected to their seafood industries. We have amazing seafood here in Vancouver Island, and nobody knows about it. Most of it's being shipped out to Japan or Toronto. Like case in point, I grew up in Comox Valley. I had no idea that 50% of Canada's oyster output was coming out of like that area, right? Like I didn't even have an oyster till I was like my late 20s, 30s. So yeah, I'm an advocate for this. I have a bit of a startup with a friend of mine where we take oyster shells and coffee grounds and we're turning into fertilizer. Um, there's a lot of opportunity, and it's a fun opportunity, and I'm kind of crazy like that I have so much fun with this stuff. But it puts smiles on people's face. It's not food, it's experiences.
Nice. So usually I ask at the very end about what a guest's favorite cocktail is, but I'm going to ask you what your favorite oyster is if you have one.
My favorite oyster?
Yeah.
Well, I got to give you the same speech I give everybody else. It's whatever freshest.
Nice.
So take the freshest product and then ask the questions after. Don't worry about the size. Most oysters at any well-respected oyster bar are called cocktail size, which is meant for raw consumption. Don't ask about brand names. It's interesting, but like, find what's the freshest. Have that one. Don't even know the brand name actually. Just eat the thing and get the terroir and get the experience and bite into it, and the sweet and the salty and the crisp texture and the clean finish, and then be like, where was that from? What oyster was that? Oh, okay. Like everybody's so caught up in the brand names that it detracts them from what they really need to know, right?
Well, man, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know we've chatted about this for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah.
You have been an inspiration. Just I know how hard it is opening a restaurant for your first time, and it's not the easiest experience in your life, but the way you've done it and the expansion, just that conversation we had at Harbour Air that day, like opened my eyes to a few things that you were doing in the background that I think a lot of people always miss out when you're an entrepreneur. They always think that you're singular. And then you're like, no, I've got this going on, and I got this going on, and I got that going on. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and you too, Shawn. I mean, you were one of the first to do this on the island, and like we made the joke how you still remember Moxie's, right? You had to start somewhere.
Two episodes.
you know, and then it's cool to see what you've done. And I mean, there's parallels, right? It's anybody that is trying to keep, you know, reaching up. It's sure will. And it's 100 different things going on at any given time. And you don't know how they're all going to connect. And then you take 3 of them and you're like, oh, this is working. And that's part of it. So there's a lot of random luck, but you gotta make your own luck.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, man. I'll chat to you real soon. I got to come in for oysters now. I've got to fucking hang. So you'll see me.
Well, I'm about to head down there right now anyway. So
You
there
might
you
see
go.
me today then.
All right. Thanks, Shawn. Appreciate